I'm Matt Booker.
And I'm Dave Laird.
And I'm Grace Chipperfield, reminding you no floor has a face here in the Great Concavity.
Oh, that's dark. That's good. I mean, well, maybe it's light if there's no face in the floor.
Yeah, well, I was wondering if it would be too, obscure a reference, but...
No black wings in the Great Concavity, I suppose.
No.
I mean, if you've read Infinite Jest, hopefully it's not too obscure.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to episode 30 of the Great Concavity. We're joined by Australian scholar Grace Chipperfield. Grace, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. We got the very great pleasure of hanging out with you at DFW 17 a few weeks ago in Illinois, and it was very cool to hang out, and we got to tour the grand city of Normal, Bloomington, together, and did a lot of photos and drank iced coffee. Bloomington Normal. Sorry, I reversed it. So yeah, that was cool. How was your experience at the conference overall, Grace?
It was amazing. I came last year as well,
mm-hmm.
and was very much I thought it was awesome, but I sort of stayed probably on the edges, kind of just being introverted and everything. So, but then getting to know you all online between then and
mm-hmm.
now, coming back to the conference, I was just very excited, and you all lived up to even my highest expectations, so it was good. I tried to manage them because I was like, I'll turn up and I need to not be too over the top, but yeah, no, it was awesome.
Oh, cool. So our online personas lived up to the projected aspirations that you had for them?
Yes, although of course I'd like to say you're better in real life, but...
Oh, wow, that's cool. Very cool. Yeah, I think that Twitter and these various platforms that we have to keep the conversation going are just really rich and important for the year between the conference, and I've always felt super connected to everyone, in the year, and it goes by pretty fast because of it. And then
Definitely.
We were saying it's like going to summer camp, every year.
Totally.
Because you're back with your camp buddies.
I mean, I think, from this point forward, and I'm pretty sure someone else has already said this, but the thought of missing a conference would be very hard to sit with, I would say. I know Tony couldn't make it this year, and he kind of asked me how it went, but said he didn't really want to know because he was sad he missed out.
You're like, it was rubbish.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I said.
I mean, I missed it last year, and I felt like I was definitely missing out. I tried to fool myself into that it would be, I could make it up by next year. And I feel like there's a huge difference in missing 1 year. I really regret that. And I think there are new people that you meet each time. And I'm not gonna miss a year, and I hope that there's a lot of talk about where will the conference be, and it's been in Illinois State for 4 years now, and I really hope it stays there, and we can just have some place like that to return to every year.
Yeah, it's definitely the Meccan pilgrimage almost.
Totally,
just kidding.
I kind of think that's correct, and when I filled out that survey this time round, and they said, where would you be happy to have it? I was like, well, I'd kind of like it just to stay in Normal,
mm-hmm.
but depends, I guess, on the financial situation.
Right, yeah, and no offense to Islam with my comment, relating the two things, not to be said.
I think it has a colloquial meaning as well, Dave.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
Let me back up and give Grace a little bit of the proper introduction. So we didn't read this officially, but I'm going to read your bio from the conference, which says Grace Chipperfield is a PhD candidate in creative writing, at Flinders University in Adelaide, South Australia. She's researching what it is to be an American citizen and how this relates to adolescence and adulthood in the works of David Foster Wallace. She also tutors in English literature at Flinders University, and what it doesn't say there is that she also is a recipient of a Fulbright.
Thank you for adding that.
Well, I think it's a big deal, and we're going to talk a lot about your work and your project there, but will you explain a little bit about your dual role there between creative writing and literature?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the PhD,
Yes.
yeah, so we, it's a strange beast. We have to write what they call a novel-length work, but it's probably more like a novella. So about 70,000 words of creative writing, and then that's bracketed by 30,000 words of the exegesis, which is meant to put the work in context. So, yeah, that's kind of the distinction.
I guess what I'm getting at is, do you see yourself as a writer doing criticism, or as a scholar doing creative writing?
It's weird. I think when I started, you got told a lot. This is a very schizophrenic process. You know, some days you'll be in creative writer brain, and other days you'll be in, you know, you'll have to be critical researcher, and you'll also have to kind of critically analyze your own work, and that's the part that I hate. But so it depends what my supervisors tell me to do. And when they told me to write the manuscript for my novel, I slipped very much into creative writer mode, and that was so much fun. And now I have to get back into researcher mode. So I think both is the answer, and I'm not sure now which I identify more with.
Interesting. Do you find the creative writing side more life-giving than the like critical scholarship side when it comes to sitting down at the computer?
Yes. I mean, I find the creative writing side really cathartic in a way. But when I read good scholarship, that kind of is thoughtful and articulate, I get very excited too. So I guess there's a difference between kind of producing the work, and then as a researcher, I get to kind of learn from other people. So I like that side of it.
You know, the common thread there that I just, it makes me think of this writer, Ricardo Pelia, who's a Latin American writer. And he does a similar thing where he writes criticism, or wrote, he just died this year, but he wrote criticism and he also wrote tons of fiction. And he was asked often, like, what are you? Are you a critic? Are you or novelist? And he I think he identified himself first and foremost as a reader.
Oh, okay.
And that he saw himself as a sort of autobiography could be read out of your bookshelves, some of which is criticism, some of which is fiction.
Right.
And so I always thought that was an interesting definition to try to draw the line between, or to blur the line maybe. So I mean, not many universities offer that creative writing in a PhD in creative writing. That's why I also just wanted you to talk about it a bit.
Yeah, I'm really excited that I get to do a PhD in creative writing, although, you know, everyone forecasts a very bleak future for me, so
in terms of job prospects.
Sorry, yeah, totally.
Yeah. There are other forms of richness, I suppose, right?
Exactly.
You can't worry about that too much.
Yeah. So Grace, maybe walk us through a little bit of the presentation that you gave this year at DFW 17. I unfortunately missed it, but Matt said it was excellent. And you ended up being the lone presenter on your panel, and you just worked it, and you crushed. So.
Oh, well, that's very nice to hear.
Allow me to live vicariously through your recap.
Sure. Well, I mean, it was kind of the same as DFW 16. I turned up and thought it was just the norm that, like, I'd been slated to present by myself there as well. So that gave me practice for this year. But so my paper was, what did I title it? It was about the idea that US citizens are in a state of protracted adolescence, as that is US citizens as they appear in Wallace's work. So I was looking at the reference in The Pale King that Wallace makes in section 19, where it says that US citizens are adolescent in their approach to their citizenship. And the paper was about kind of breaking down the use of that word more, and what that had led me to was adolescent theories in psychology and the idea of the identity crisis. And so I was talking about how I felt that US citizens, there was a personal and a national identity crisis, and how those interrelate, and looking at that.
Yeah.
And that relationship between, I think it's really interesting the way that you've set up this framework about the kind of developmental stages of kind of human maturity, and then comparing that with national maturity. And I think I told you after the paper I was a little bit defensive of it, because I feel like, why are you saying American is immature? You say you're coming over here from Australia, but I find that there's really something. I mean, of course, there's something to that, right? And I would agree with you, but I think that if you could just dig into that a little bit more and talk about how that is reflected in some of Wallace's works, I think that would help us contextualize it.
Yeah, sure. What you came up and said to me at the end of that paper was like my worst nightmare, and I was kind of expecting it to happen as well, because I was like, I am just an Australian
Grace.
coming over to tell you all that you're acting like teenagers, but which is not, that's obviously not quite as nuanced as the research hopefully is, but so in terms of how I've read that into Wallace's works, I was sort of just looking at, I don't think that he was, in his use of the word adolescent, just kind of criticizing US citizens for being kind of immature or acting like teenagers. I think what he was pointing more towards was this idea of the identity crisis, which, to kind of break that down a little bit more, is really just in the psychology discipline, it's just a word used to mark a turning point in your development, I guess, where you have to kind of make some choices about who you are and what you value and where you want to go in life. And what I think is happening in Wallace's works is that, his characters don't want to engage with that process because it's confronting and it's uncomfortable. And it might, it requires a level of self-reflection that might return some information to you that you're not particularly
fond of.
Yeah, exactly. And so I sort of, in terms of psychology and everything, the idea is that, once you go through the identity crisis, that's when you kind of achieve your identity. And it's also, where you reach maturity and you become an adult, which again is not as clear cut as that. You always go back and forth and you always have multiple crises across your life. But so I guess, my approach is looking at the characters in his works and the America that he reproduces in his works, and kind of seeing what's not allowing them to go, or what is enabling them not to engage with that crisis, and if there is any evidence in his works of someone that does, and how that might look once they become, what he considers to be a good adult or something.
Well, I thought you had a ton of good examples to back this up, and the one that really, there's a couple that stood out to me. One is that famous quote, I think it's from the McCaffrey interview, where he talks about that feeling of being at a party and everyone's parents are gone and it's the morning after and the house is a wreck and you're just sort of waiting for the parents to come home. And that feeling of, wanting like protection and comfort and support. I mean, that to me, I don't know if you have the quote handy. I don't have the quote handy. But,
yeah, that's the last page of the McCaffrey interview.
I mean, that speaks very much to that sort of like absence or, ambivalence towards, strong authority figures and being stuck in adolescence.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there is always that push-pull between not wanting to be told what to do, but wanting someone to take care of it. Definitely.
Yeah, the context of that quote is like, he's talking about the state of U.S. fiction, right? And we've reached this point of like postmodern nihilism, and it's like, that's the party was good for a while, for a couple decades, but now it's like, we just want some, restore some fucking order to the house, I think is the quote.
Yes.
And maybe that's kind of like his call in E Unibus Plurum to like have a new sort of body of writers that restore, like, that care about single entendre principles and all that moral stuff, right?
Definitely. And I think, when he moves that kind of discussion into his fiction and talks about, these characters that don't want to grow up, I think he's just trying to work out, like if you can't rely on the parent to be there, or if you're at the point in your life where you should have probably grown up by now, like how do you do that? And what choices do you have to make to do that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And that's Fogel too. So we talked a lot about Fogel because he seems definitely stuck in that protracted adolescence and, needs some kind of catalyst to force him out of his complacency or whatever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that I think, I press you a little bit on like, well, what is the solution then? How do you get out of this protracted adolescence? How do you actually mature and grow up? And Wallace offers a couple of solutions, I think, through Gately or, something about taking personal responsibility and trying to be a better person. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yes, well, definitely. I mean, as I said at the conference, I don't think Fogel is the kind of template to be used in order to become an adult. I think, Wallace, not to speak for him or anything, but like I think, a lot of his work was kind of dealing with things that he found uncomfortable in himself, or perhaps about the culture that he existed in. And Fogel's story seems to be like the extreme antithesis of that, in terms of taking responsibility and, things that are dull and boring, being heroic and everything. So I think Fogel is just one example of how that might happen. But I mean, you're right. He kind of has this whole section where he's talking about how he's primed to, have these epiphanies and make these choices. And so in terms of, how we end up growing up, I think there is no one way that I'm going to be able to suggest with my research that says like, okay, well, this is what you need to do now. But I think usually what happens is there are symptoms there where you're not happy, or you're you're not happy and you're trying to avoid that feeling of not being happy. And then you get to a point, and I think I'm probably paraphrasing poorly, but there's like oh no, you know who I'm quoting. I think I'm quoting John Mango from another episode, but
he's a good guy to quote.
Yeah, that's an excellent episode. Where he says like, this shit has got to stop, and I think that's when a lot of people start doing that thinking. So I think you have to hit that kind of bottom in a way and work out like, I can't continue feeling this way, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And there was another piece of that, though, that I think interested me, and I didn't fully catch about how you had something about, not equating like a 9-to-5 job with happiness. And there was something like about Sisyphus in there. And I was like, my ears perked up very much because I work a 9-to-5 job day in and day out in, a fluorescent cubicle farm of the likes of which Wallace only imagined rather than lived.
Right.
And Fogel sort of aspires to this, right? He sort of aspires to, become this sort of cowboy of information, and has like a semi-religious conversion. So,
right.
I mean, I guess there's a lot going on there. And part of me wonders, like what role religion plays in that.
Yeah.
Maturation, I don't know.
It's hard to, I'm trying to sort of, I'm thinking back to, so I also did an honours thesis on Wallace, comparing, like looking at him with Camus and that idea of Sisyphus. And
so, and Sisyphus, for me, is that thing about how you're making at the beginning, making a connection between choice and like emotional maturity, whereas are you really making a choice to roll a thing up a hill all the time if that's your sort of responsibility? And I guess I'm not being very eloquent about this either, but I'm just wondering, is it really a choice to be that kind of mature, responsible citizen that you want? Like if American citizens are in this protracted adolescence, then what is the choice that they need to make to get there?
Right. Okay. I guess a lot of the problems that seem to resurface in Wallace's works is about that individualism and that idea that, you know, I'm the most important person and my happiness is the most important thing. So I suppose in terms of making a choice to grow up, it's also about making probably an ethical choice or something to go, I do not get to just be the center of the universe, and you know there are other people in the world that also, you know, want to feel special and everything, and kind of making a choice to just
That's
accept
good.
that.
That's good. No,
Like-
that's good right there. And I think this is another side issue that came up in the conference a lot this year, and I'm part of the problem, is that I think there was like a scholarly reputation for a while that the graduation speech, the commencement address, was sort of like Wallace light. And I think now I see it coming up into more and more scholarship being taken more seriously. And I felt like that was a little bit of a shift this year. And like what you just said there about like you get to decide what to think. You know, you get this choice that is free will. And that is one of the key tenets of that commencement address as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I guess, you know, for me, there are times in my day-to-day life where I, you know, feel really resentful or, you know, self-pitying and want to blame something else for the way that I feel. And, or that I think that things should happen a certain way for me. And I think, you know, when I am aware of those thoughts, I'm quite embarrassed by them. And I think, you know, part of that Kenyon College commencement address is sort of just promoting a certain level of mindfulness about yourself and your thoughts that, you know, you might just kind of that. I mean, you're having a childish thought, and like, do you acknowledge that that is what it is and choose differently? Like, choose not to just obey that thought, or do you kind of just let it keep going and feel pretty rotten about the way things are?
You wrote a piece, was it last year, about this kind of question in the context of like political identity in the U.S. and like how do citizens of a nation behave like adults and grow up to become adults when like their national leadership is displaying no qualities that look anywhere remotely close to that, particularly with respect to Donald Trump.
Yeah. And I mean, so, I mean, I should also say that when I talk about this research and everything, I talk about it in an American context because that's what Wallace wrote about. But, I mean, my interest in it comes from, you know, seeing these same things happening in Australia to a certain degree and in different ways.
Okay. I was going to ask you that, yeah.
Nice save.
Way to spread it around a bit. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
Canadians probably fall into this category. Anyone in the British Commonwealth, etc.
All Western developed nations, basically. Yeah.
Okay. So not to put you down too much here, Matt.
That's fine.
And so, I mean, I'm curious to know what you guys think about Trump. But I mean, my approach was that, you know, it sounds quite harsh to quote Wallace when he says, you know, we elect what we deserve. But I'm getting more and more frustrated back home with the political discourse and with, you know, I think politicians do behave in a childish way, but I'm not convinced that that isn't just because they don't really have much of an option when we as citizens don't really allow them to talk very honestly about things. So,
As
in
an
terms of
Australian, are you also a little bit worried about the vampireness of Australian politicians?
The vampireness.
Do you remember this John Safran versus God
No,
skit where he
don't.
like goes to Canberra and there's like a rumor circulating that like you know there's like one of Australians politicians is a vampire, so he has like garlic and a huge crucifix and like a mirror and stuff. He gets kicked off because he's not allowed to have props on parliamentary grounds, but. Anyways.
That sounds very similar to there's a well, they're kind of in different form at the moment, but there used to be a show called The Chasers War and everything. They
that's a great show.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah,
man.
Their one on The Secret. Did you ever see that? You know that book,
Yes.
The Secret? That's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. So good. Anyway, sorry, not to derail the conversation.
Well, I have a couple of more questions about your framework and your research here about Erikson, because I think that's really interesting, the way that you're using the identity crisis. And in your paper, you mentioned something about, it was called diffuse avoidant identity processing syndrome or style.
Or DAPES.
DAPES. And I was like, could you define that a little bit? Because to me, when you were saying the symptoms out loud, I was writing down like me, also me. Maybe I have this. So
very self-aware.
Yeah, sure.
Man.
In fact, I can probably quote the thing that I said, but basically, so there are like 4 statuses of identity, which I went through, which were achievement, moratorium, foreclosure, and diffusion. And then there were 3 styles, and basically that is how people approach the identity crisis. So diffuse avoidant identity processing style, or as I was calling it, DAPES. Someone who uses this style, and this is the quote, will procrastinate and avoid identity-relevant conflicts and decisions as long as possible. They have a fragmented or empty sense of self that continually needs to be bolstered and renewed by approval, acceptance, pleasurable experiences, or material possessions. And for them, alleviating distress and negative affect is more important than actually solving the problem. They resort to immature defensive processes such as denying personal responsibility and blaming others to excuse or rationalize potentially negative self-diagnostic information. And when I read that, I was
That's
like,
terrifying.
Oh man, me too.
Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, it's just a tough pill to swallow, man. You know, you just
I think
put it all right out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's tough because, like, as a teenager, you know, there's a level of acceptance that might be the way that you are in the world for a while. But as an adult, when you recognize those things in you still, it can be quite confronting.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain level of like biological brain chemistry that facilitates that kind of approach to thinking about the world, right? Like in my education degree, we had a whole class on adolescent psychological development. And it was like the most terrifying, like 2 weeks of my life sitting through some of this information, because it's like their decision-making process tree is like so undeveloped. And it really like, it's kind of like into your like mid-20s where your brain chemistry starts to change in a way where, you know, you start to make decisions in a much more rational way and you don't see yourself as completely invincible. So it sounds like the protracted adolescent stuff you're talking about, like, while it has to do with brain chemistry, what happens when your cultural climate is just is like in limbo in that space? How do you come out of that?
Yeah. And I mean, the paper that I presented in 2016 was much more about that cultural side of stuff. Versus like this year, it was very much more about the individual taking responsibility for themselves. So it definitely is a bi-directional relationship, and it's really hard because it's that chicken or egg situation where you're always kind of feeding back one to the other and the effects of it.
And there's one other thing, I mean, it brings up a ton of issues, because that thing about blaming others rather than taking responsibility, it also is at odds with that concept of, you know, the lack of strong parental authority figures. And then you can sort of blame all of these other things, like what was done to me, going back to really like infanthood. And you had another great connection in here about, it was a quote from the cruise ship essay, and it was about I don't know if you can pull this up or get the quote about. Probably. He talks about connects being on the cruise ship to being like in the womb.
Oh yeah, I have the quote if you want it.
Please do, please.
It was. How long has it been since you did absolutely nothing? I know exactly how long it's been for me. I know how long it's been since I had every need met choicelessly from some place outside me without my having to ask or even acknowledge that I needed. And that time I was floating too, and the fluid was salty and warm but not too. And if I was conscious at all, I'm sure I felt dreadless and was having a really good time and would have sent postcards to everyone wishing they were here. Which is just great.
I mean, Jesus. I mean, that sent chills up my spine, and partly because I feel like that amusing ourselves to death or comforting ourselves to death, that Wallace
Yeah.
really didn't live to see the full flowering of the distraction level that can be accomplished by an iPhone.
Oh,
And,
totally.
Yeah.
The ability to do nothing or freeze your mind and think nothing, and to avoid. He talks about this a lot, and I think he saw a little bit of it coming, but the ability to think nothing and to do nothing and distract yourself from real world, to me, the dominant future is going to be about that screen issue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I went away for like a weekend earlier in the year where I knew that my phone wouldn't have service, and I didn't want it to eat up my data, so I turned that off. And I actually almost finished a book, and it was great. And
Yeah, I've been reading the
I was
same book for like 3 weeks, and I'm only like on page 50 right now for this very reason. Yeah.
Exactly. It's just very easy. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, it's just really easy to pick up your phone and, yeah.
Well, in the past year or two, it's gotten compounded by the fact that at least here in the U.S. we live in a total fucking dystopia. And
Yeah, so you asked Matt's thoughts on Trump. Here we go.
and every time you pick up your phone, it's more like what rights are being stripped from our fellow citizens, what kind of awful discrimination is being built into the Constitution and the Supreme Court. Now, I mean, it goes on and on, so it's really distracting. I find it even more so distracting that just at the touch of a button, anywhere, anytime, you can sort of feed this fear,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
like
I mean,
the rat button, right? The rats that hit the pleasure button, but it's the opposite.
Yes.
And we're every time you go onto Twitter, you just see like really awful things about this stuff for the most part. But yeah, you keep going back there every day, and you just feel rotten after. But
Yeah, I mean, I
it's
wanted
so
to ask-
compelling.
Well, like, do you get see, my reaction to that normally is fatigue, and I want to switch off from that. So, like, do you find that it's so compelling that you need to read every article on Trump that there is, or do you find that instead what that means is that you go elsewhere for distraction in the same kind of medium?
I mean, I go back and forth. I think there's something built into the technology, though, that is addictive.
Yeah.
And it is messing with my brain chemistry in the way that like an addictive substance would. Mm-hmm. And that, if you get really addicted to something, it's not like, if you're abusing a drug, like if you're abusing something and you're using it to, I don't know, seek some pleasure that you can't find elsewhere. It's a different thing when you're addicted to it, where you need it for your brain to sort of stay at equilibrium. So I don't know. I think that there's something really toxic about it, and I'm like addicted to it. Mm-hmm. And I don't like reading about it. Sometimes I would rather read books, and I still read. I finished 2 books in the past 7 days.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, Matt's pretty voracious. He puts us all.
But it's because it's a war, right?
Yeah.
It's a war for attention, and
Yeah.
Wallace is very big about this, and I think that it is going to continue to infantilize our intellectual society or our world of thoughts, and certainly our current federal government is contributing to the anti-intellectualization of American society in a big way. And I find this all just extremely troubling, especially after 8 pretty great years of Barack Obama.
Yeah, it's quite a departure. Like, they're kind of like binaries of each other, really.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a 2-part interview in the New York Review of Books with Marilyn Robinson. I don't know if either of you read Obama talking with Marilyn Robinson.
Is this when he was talking
didn't.
about reading, creating empathy?
Yeah, he was talking about reading. He was talking about literary history and novels. I mean, it's phenomenal. And really, to imagine any of our recent Republican presidents, I can't do it. Like, I can't even imagine any of them talking about literature in this way.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is just really troubling, that the fact that the country is, that we're in this place to begin with and have got to somehow dig really deep to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And, that to me, I think that's why your research is so relevant, and we wanted to talk to you about this identity crisis, because I feel like we're living in it.
Yeah. it's it. Yeah, I mean, last year when I did my first paper, the election outcome was still very much up in the air, and I think I genuinely went to well, it was our evening when when Trump became president, and I had thought for the entire day that, like, you know, this is just, it's Clinton, you know, like this is kind of a shock to the system, but like it'll go back to the status quo, and yeah, so it was quite. I don't really know how to interpret it yet.
Mm-hmm. Have you guys seen the film Idiocracy?
Yeah. It's mostly filmed in Austin.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Mike Judge is an Austin original.
Oh, yeah.
Big parts of Office Space were filmed here.
Oh, good.
Plenty of his other stuff. And, you know, Mike Judge was interviewed recently in the New York Times and was asked about Idiocracy. Yeah. And he was like, maybe he was a little too optimistic.
Oh, that's what he said. That's bleak.
I mean, for one, in the movie, there's a character who is the Secretary of State who is sponsored by Carl's Jr. And he's just like, he has to say the word Carl's Jr. in like every sentence. And Trump actually tried to nominate the CEO of Carl's Jr. to be the Secretary of Labor and had to pull the nomination. So, I mean, like, we are almost there. Yeah. And in the movie, it takes 500 years to get to this complete dystopian idiocracy. Yeah. And it's like, we did it in about 5 months. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I guess the bigger problem too, Grace, maybe you can talk about this, is really that the electoral politics is sort of a reflection of the underlying problem. I mean, what do you, because I think some of this has been building up for years, what do you see as really some of these underlying issues? Is it really about emotional maturity or anti-intellectualism or education in general? Like, what is it?
I mean, I think it's tricky to pin it on one thing. I think
solve it. American politics. Go.
Well, perhaps I'd feel more comfortable relating it to Australian politics. I sort of see, you know, people tend to find politics boring, and so they don't really want to pay attention to it. So the politicians start talking in sound bites because that's all that we're willing to digest, or they start talking about what the other guy did wrong rather than, you know, actually having a nuanced conversation about things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we don't seem to be particularly, and again, I'm being so general that like even Australians will start hating me as well, but you know, we don't seem particularly interested in having a thoughtful conversation about that. It's become what I think Wallace was really concerned about, which was that, like, that partisanship, you know, that inability to actually talk beyond just what your party is, and to listen to the other guy. And so I think that it's just this kind of weird feedback loop where, you know, like back here, we have this show called Q&A where politicians and other commentators come on, and it's a panel discussion, and Australian citizens can ask questions. And inevitably, when it gets to the major party representatives, they kind of devolve into this thing of like, well, the other party did this, and, you know, and we wanted to do that. And it just really reflects this kind of childishness and stubbornness about kind of maybe you're not right, or maybe you need to listen to someone else. And so I think it's all, and then the media feeds it as well, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on there, which is just tricky. So I don't know. I think that
idea about, you know, what you're saying about the ambivalence, like the general ambivalence toward specific political leaders and figures, that feeds into what you were saying about the developmental process, where there's sort of an absence of parental authority figures, or an ambivalence towards them. But to me, there's another issue where I imagine being Australian, right? And I imagine growing up in a world where there is a strong safety net, which there is not in the United States. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that sort of social safety net is an authority figure, or it's something that's a protector. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, you know, if your identity feels a little bit different, knowing that even if you fail at life, even if you don't create a new business, like, you're going to be okay. Whereas that's not true in the US. Like, there's a strong likelihood you could go to prison or become homeless, or, you know, really screw up your life. And, you know, we have more violence and guns and all of these other issues that, combined with the lack of a social safety net, like, what is the true parental or authority figure that people need? Is it that political system, political leader, or is it really this kind of social safety net?
Both, ideally, I guess. I mean, you're right. I think in Australia I feel very secure, and I think that there's a level of stability, perhaps to the point of not much change at all, but like, there's certainly a stability to our political system. And I mean, you know, we have compulsory voting and everything, so there's a level of engagement with that too.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you don't vote, you get a fine.
Oh,
so,
crazy.
Yeah, which I was only having a conversation about this yesterday, and I mean, that's not the case in America. And I was talking to someone, and she was saying, you know, I would resent being told that I had to vote when if I want to choose not to vote and everything. So, I think there are some systems in place in Australia that give us security that there isn't in America, and perhaps that is part of that feeling of individualism, or sorry, I hope you didn't hear that. I just got a notification. There's that feeling of individualism maybe in America, where it's like, well, I have to take care of myself, and there is that self-interest associated with that. I'm not sure.
Was it an American who said that to you about, like, being upset that someone would force them to vote?
No, she's Canadian, actually.
Oh, a Canadian said that, really?
Yeah.
How infantile.
You're not perfect either. But see, both of your countries have you have the socialized medicine, and you have smart gun policies. You have a lot of kind of also the stigma that is in America with, you know, taking government assistance is so strong,
right?
And it's considered to be that you have failed at life, and you are maybe not even human if you are on. I'm dead serious, like, about if you take assistance from welfare, food stamps, and that you really are trash.
You're a parasite on society or something.
You're garbage human, and you're what's wrong with America, and you need to, you know, be ashamed and just live in shame. And that is part, I think, of what drives us into these factions. And it's exacerbated by having two political parties. I mean, Australia and Canada both have multiple political parties and different voting systems that, give me some hope that other Western reforms might eventually trickle down to our political system. But today, and middle of 2017, it feels pretty broken.
Yeah. There's also a weird thing too for me about America, in that, like, if you think about, like, the like Protestant puritanical origins of the US, and, like, the idea of the city on the hill, is it John Winthrop, I think, and, like, the idea that America is a Christian nation. And yet, like, what you just described to me, Matt, sounds like so socially Darwinian. That truly, like, everyone is on their own. The government is not there to, like, you know, prefer grace in certain cases where it's needed. Like, it's just like that claim, the Republican idea still that, like, we're representing, like, Christian values, is just so totally bonkers.
No, it's not no longer anything to do with,
like, you can't
especially
say
with
that.
Trump.
Yeah.
It's not any kind of moral argument anymore. It's very much a capitalistic idea where, Ronald Reagan was a big part of this, and that Ronald Reagan pushed this idea that, you know, anyone can become a millionaire, and this is the one country in the world where you can become a millionaire, and that's really what you should aspire to, not to being a Christian or being a great person, but being a millionaire. And that's really gets back to the Kenyan speech, what you worship. And it's like, if you worship money and things, if that's where you tap real meaning, guess what? You'll never have enough. And America has the most billionaires And it's just a matter of time until, you know, Amazon becomes the first $1 trillion company, or Apple becomes a $1 trillion company. And then that's really where we tap real meaning. But now I'm just like, it's not even a question. I'm just ranting. I should really get back to a question for you. But when we first asked you, like, are you a creative writer or academic, Grace? That, to me, I realized, like, after we started talking about Erickson, is kind of an identity crisis in its own, or maybe
Sure.
maybe I'm projecting that it's an identity crisis, right? But I wonder that kind of dualism where you have two, you know, a creator on one side and a critic on the other side. That, you know, is there a part of it that is you know, naturally you have more affinity towards?
I think I would say that a year ago I was more interested in the critical side of stuff, probably because I found that maybe less scary than the creative writing side of things.
Yeah.
Um,
It is less scary.
and yeah, especially when, you know, you consider showing that stuff to another person. But now, having written the creative side of things, I felt that there was a lot more flexibility in that side, and kind of the ability to look at things from a few perspectives. So I think my critical brain can be a bit overbearing sometimes, and that means it's hard to write. And so the creative side probably is where I'm more aligned with now.
So you're siding with our man Wallace on that, and that he viewed himself as a creative writer and then just happened to do like critical stuff on the side.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
for money or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that there are some great critical writers that are as interesting to read as, you know, fiction and everything. And Erickson, for example, is a very engaging writer, and quite I think he was quite a cheerful and sort of I don't know, conversational writer, which I thought was really good too. I don't think that you I think critical stuff can be oh God, that's dangerous to say. Can be engaging. So yeah.
Available on demand.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
academia.edu.
one reason why I keep coming back to this is that, you know, our conference that we go to is unique in that the founder of the first conference, Jane Carmen, shout out to Jane.
Yeah, Jane.
She, I think, also is a creative writer and has a PhD in creative writing from Illinois State, which is unique in that they offer a PhD in creative writing. And she was pretty insistent that the conference have creative writing panels in addition to scholarly panels. And I've never been to an academic conference that does this. Like, I have never seen an academic conference, especially one for a single writer, that gives any kind of precedence to creative writing or reading at all. So I think it's unique that there are only a couple people, and you're one of them, who can go to a conference like that and present both.
Yeah. I think it's awesome.
I think that it's something that at least we think about, or I think about, in terms of Wallace's legacy and what he leaves behind to academia and versus literature on a broader scale. I mean, what's your opinion on that, about, you know, his legacy in the academic world versus in, you know, the public, the reading public?
Well, I think, and this might be a little bit off topic, but like tangential to that, I think one of the cool things about this conference is the crowd that it draws, and some people come just because they're fans of their readers and they like him as an author, which I mean, the David Foster Wallace conference is the only one that I've ever really been to, and I think I lucked into that as well, because I think it's just probably quite unique and also really precious for that. So I think that, you know, Wallace why it's so interesting to come to a conference is that, you know, and Matt Luder sort of talked about this in his presentation as well, is that there's that blend of the personal with, you know, people don't view Wallace just as purely something to be broken down and kind of analysed in really obscure ways, but more there's always that personal connection, that emotional attachment to his writing. And so I think that's quite a unique legacy that he's left behind.
No, I think that's exactly where I was going with that, in that, to me, if a writer is going to have any kind of immortality, it's going to be with people who are just discovering him or her. And, you know, there's a lot of 19-year-old kids picking up Infinite Jest this summer. And to me, those are the people who are going to keep him relevant, rather than, you know, 12 people from the University of Manitoba. No offense, but Manitoba.
Well, it'd be
or
amazing
Alberta.
if Manitoba had like a department on Wallace. That'd be the difference.
But do you know what I mean? Like, if you get like 3 tenure track professors who publish about a writer in 3 journals that no one reads, to me, that's almost as worthless as
that's extinction to you.
It's extinction, right? You might as well not even exist.
Yeah.
And that to me is a lot different than having, you know, 1,200 Tumblr pages or Twitter accounts that are fan accounts. And so having that combination of fan and academic, to me, is also a huge unique feature that I definitely do not see in other individual author societies.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's, you know, hopeful, given that, you know, politics has taken a turn towards social media and everything as well, that, you know, an author can also cross that boundary and maybe, I don't know, balance things out a bit.
Well, and it's still a very young field too, where there's a lot of people who come to this conference and give their first conference paper and have, you know, just gotten their first job or published their first book. So I think there's a lot of future ahead of us in this conference. So it's really great to talk to you now before you're famous.
That's great. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, speaking of your creative writing endeavors, can you give us like any kind of preview into the novel that you're working on for your dissertation, or is that kind of like top secret at this point?
No, I'd be happy to. I mean, I'm a little concerned too, because the inspiration for the novel was so in a topic last year I had to teach Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf and also The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which I'd read as an undergrad and had found, you know, like pretty and then I reread them when I was a bit older, and I just thought they were amazing books. And so I guess, you know, the novel is trying to do for Wallace what The Hours did for Mrs. Dalloway, which is quite an ambitious way of putting it, but perhaps the simplest way. So the reason I'm concerned, to kind of give you a bit of a peek into it, is because I have borrowed characters from Wallace's works and
cool.
you know, particular narrative styles and everything to try and pay tribute to his writing. So
can you say which characters?
Yeah,
Right. Like Pemulus, fingers crossed.
Yes.
Really? Yeah.
Pemulus, yeah. And Meredith Rand and Lane Dean Jr. and Leonard Stesek and Kate Gompert appears, but as the daughter of Meredith Rand. So,
oh, wow, cool.
I have really enjoyed it, but it'll be interesting for someone from the Wallace community to approach that, and because I know that there's that could, we'll see how it's received.
Well, I think the good thing is that the Wallace community seems to be pretty graceful on most things from what I've experienced. So you're probably going to be in good hands, I think.
Ooh, yeah, maybe
it's a mixed bag for me.
I
think that idea is super interesting, and to bring it back to the the hours in Mrs. Dalloway. I think Michael Cunningham is a greatly underrated writer. And he also did a similar thing with Walt Whitman in Specimen Days. And if you haven't read that one, I think it's fantastic. Anyone out there, if you want to read Specimen Days by Michael Cunningham, and Ben Lerner took it another step and did a thing about Specimen Days in his book 1004.
Oh, right.
That's like following up on partly on Michael Cunningham and Whitman together. So it's like, literature gets a bad rap for like, music you can remix, and you can have remakes of films, and it's like, well, literature does that too. So I think you're in a fine tradition.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I know that I know how much I attach to certain characters in Wallace, so I guess I don't want to be the shitty sequel that everyone thinks trashed the characters, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll let someone read it from the community and they can give me a preview of what's in store.
Well, since you mentioned Meredith Rand and Kate Gompert, what's your take on Wallace's ability to write female characters?
I can see why there has been discussions recently about his ability to write female characters, but to be honest, as a female reader of him, I guess I think he speaks. I don't think how to put this. I don't read those characters and feel like offended or anything. In fact, I think a lot of the stuff that he writes about in his work, that whether it's a female or a male character, I identify with. So I think that's my take on it. But I mean, there's obviously, I think there are some other scholars out there probably that were at DFW 17 that could weigh in more authoritatively on how he treats female characters.
Samantha
in
Wallace
his works.
gave a great talk about that.
Well, but I think, I guess my interest in it is exactly what you just said, in that is that a way of saying, well, then he can't write it because otherwise it's just like, well, it's universal. It could be anything. It's
the
like,
oversoul.
To me, is it even? This is a big issue of like, are you appropriating a woman's voice, or should a male author even try? Like, if it's just going to be, something that's universal, I don't know.
Like, if the character is talking,
right,
is meant to convey a universal theme, why make it why does it become? I mean, I think that he should. I think any author should. By that logic, I shouldn't write from a male perspective, right? So, I think it's just that.
So that's a crappy argument. I'm not saying that.
I just think the job of a writer. It gets tricky, doesn't it? But I don't think that he should not have written female characters, and I don't think that just because maybe they don't seem unproblematic that they shouldn't exist either. I think it was good of him to try, and I think that there's a lot that is truthful about those characters as well. So yeah, but what do you think of the female characters in his works,
Matt?
I'm just here to ask you those questions. I mean,
you're gonna play the host card.
I think
what you're gonna do. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting. His first novel, right? His first published book, is the female protagonist, and I think there's a couple different ways you could look at that. You could say, well, it's just a thinly veiled version of him. It doesn't matter if it's male or female.
Right.
It's just a thinly and it's like, well, is that any weaker art? I don't know. I'm tempted to say that a great novelist can do anything, and great fiction is magic, and you can transform anything. And a male voice, female voice, to me, he wanted to do all of those, so sure, why not?
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of Broom of the System, my sort of little theory about that I tend to write from male perspectives. I didn't make that a conscious choice. I think it just happened. And that's partly because I think I wanted to distance myself from what my head voice. I don't know, maybe, for him, even if it is a thinly veiled autobiography. Maybe that was just a way of kind of putting some space between him and his character. I'm not sure, but...
Well, it's a lot to think about. I didn't mean to spring it on you. I know it's not your area of expertise. I enjoyed. I'm just trying to avoid bringing up the Trump word again. So,
as always, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, put it this way: to go back to what I was saying, as a female reader of Wallace, I don't kind of. I mean, there's been a lot recently about whether he's a misogynist or all of that, and I don't see it that way. I sort of think I identify with stuff that's in the book, and it doesn't really matter to me whether it's from a male or female perspective. So, yeah.
Again, I think it's something that I have made a conscious effort to be open-minded about other people who have that opinion, and it's been an interesting experience to see this kind of reaction to him, because a lot of those books existed for many years without that reaction. And this is something also I just didn't give too much credence to, like, what is Wallace's critical reception, because I was just like, it's awesome. His critical reception is great. It should be great. He should have won the National Book Award, But to see his critical reception kind of change with the political times, it is a little bit related to your political project, and how the U.S. kind of moves through different phases of what matters in politics.
That's a cool line of thought, Matt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
just threw that together.
That's interesting. I like that question.
I think that what confuses me a little about where the criticism around Wallace has gone is why there is that expectation on one author to be everything to everyone, and I think there are plenty of strong female writers out there, and I think it's also good that Wallace tried to write female characters. Like, I'm surprised at how it's become very much about him in particular, I guess, as well.
So, like, the death of the author is not something that people are buying these days.
Oh, no,
that's very much alive. Yeah.
But that's a good question, and that for me that is not a problematic thing at all, because to me that just proves that Wallace is relevant, as opposed to like 25 other contemporary American writers being
good point.
As relevant. And I'm wondering if you see yourself as becoming an American literature scholar or a David Foster Wallace scholar.
Ooh. At the moment it's very much David Foster Wallace, but I think that I would like to have other facets to my research that would probably lead me in different areas. So,
like Australian politics, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. I feel kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think I just love Wallace, but sometimes I feel guilty that I don't have quite as strong a background in Australian writers and all of that. But certainly that seems to be where it's headed. So at the moment, it's very much Wallace scholarship, but that's pretty much just because I've been living and breathing him for the last 4 years. Yeah. So,
what was it for you, Grace, that like lit you up about Wallace in such a specific way?
So Wallace isn't so well known in Australia, and I was really lucky to come across him in my undergrad. One of the lecturers set Good Old Neon as a reading.
Oh, cool.
And and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that they read it and were just like, what? Like, how has this person, produced a more articulate, but, that's my brain voice just done better. And from that, the lecturer showed us snippets from the Charlie Rose interview, and her comment was that, we're watching this just because, like, let's look at, it was an uncomfortable interview. He was quite awkward. And I remember watching it. Well, yeah, but I remember watching the snippets going, but man, like, he's so smart and like articulate and thoughtful. And so from that, I just went and I think I watched a lot more of the interviews, and then I bought Oblivion, and then I bought all the books, and then The Pale King came to me, and I must say I've read The Pale King more times than I have Infinite Jest, and by more, so I'm more familiar with that, and I think I think, he came, what has stuck around for me with him is that, he became a really central part of my own mental health journey, and research, and that's where that personal connection that I was talking about, in terms of Matt Luter's paper as well. I had a very emotional attachment, still do have an emotional attachment to his works, as teaching, as formative things for me, I think. His works were just that they've been quite formative for me in that respect as well. So, I mean, in devoting my research to him, it's been partly about kind of, I guess, being grateful for what his writing's given me.
Yeah.
Well, that's the fact that you brought up good old Neon there. I was like, that is an identity crisis of a story. Like, if there is an identity crisis short story, that is it. And I go back to that story probably more than anything else Wallace has written, and it's partly because he's trying so hard in that story to get it out, to get this mindset out on paper, and also resolve it with himself. At the end, that part about being at war with himself, like, that part just crushes me whenever he talks about bringing himself into that story of what's really this guy Neil. And I think there's just something super interesting about the narration in that story. I don't want to get into it too much now because I don't really have the story handy, but the way that point of view shifts in that story to being in the car when the guy dies is super profound. Like, maybe the best thing he's done, in my opinion. Is so you started like on a high note.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I was pretty lucky, and I mean, I think it responds to that a really interesting thing, that idea of feeling like a fraud and feeling alone in that feeling, and then you realize that obviously you're not, because someone else, I don't know, it goes down a whole thing of him making people feel less alone and everything. I think it's a really strong story. I'm glad that was my introduction. There's a lot going
on there, and to shift gears a little bit, I'm reading the new book by Gerald Murnane. I'm wondering if you could recommend some Australian writers to us.
After I just said I have very little knowledge of Australian writers.
There's got to be something you would recommend.
David Mitchell, is that one?
He's not Australian.
Oh, isn't he?
No, he grew up in Japan. I mean, lived in Japan.
Okay.
This is hard. I think that my exposure to Australian literature has been really limited, weirdly enough. At university, it's been a lot of British stuff. I'm trying to think. A lot of the Australian things that I'm reading, and I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, have been more critical pieces. So
we can cut this later, Grace. Don't worry.
Can we?
Yeah, we'll make you look like not a fraud.
Don't worry. We'll just end with the good old Neon thing. We'll just let this go.
Well, my PhD is in contemporary American literature, not Australian. I
that
have
was
a friend
selfish question for me.
But that's like me too about Canada. Like, I really read very few Canadian authors. Like, it's quite embarrassing because I just think American authors are just, far and away much better, and there's way more of them. So it's
I think you're right about Canadian is not known for its great.
I mean, we have some good writers. Like, Douglas Copeland is obviously great, and
Margaret Atwood
is celebrated, obviously.
Robertson Davies, I guess.
Yeah.
And certainly don't see my inability to recommend someone as indicative of Australia's output. I mean, even in Adelaide, we have this thing called Writers' Week, which is this incredible. It brings a lot of international authors to Adelaide as well, but it's there's a lot of Australian authors there, and my ignorance is purely more to do with where my research interests have ended up rather than.
I apologize again. I just really am selfish in that I'm always looking for new things.
I am too. I understand that.
I've only read a few Australian writers, Gerald Murnane being one of them, who I really like, and Helen Garner is another one I really like. Oh yes. She's more of an essayist, I guess. But Steve Toltz, I don't know if you've read him. He was compared to Wallace a few times, so I picked him up. Really? He had a book a couple of years ago called Quicksand. I read that book. I liked Peter Carey. I'm not a huge historical fiction person, but
Have you ever come across Luke Davies, the poet, Grace?
Oh yeah.
No.
So
Luke Davies.
he wrote a book of poems called Interferon Psalms that shares the same Robin O'Neill images that we use for our podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And I've been trying to get my hands on it for years, but it's impossible. I think I mentioned this on an episode a long time ago, but I was in Portland and I went to Powell's Books, and they're like, we've never heard of that. It's not in our system. And I was like, well, if those guys don't have it, then I'm pretty hosed in North America to be able to get it, I think so.
Oh man, I have to see if I can get it in Australia.
Yeah.
I think it's wildly funny that, you guys are the ones giving me recommendations about people to find here.
Well,
It's
really
funny because
matters,
I asked Tony and
Nick.
I asked Lucas Thompson. I ask all of these people this question because I just want to read good stuff. And Tony pointed out that when he was in the archive, there is a copy of a Peter Carey book that is in Wallace's archive, and Wallace wrote on the author cover that Peter Carey had eyes like weak tea. And it was
I
great.
don't know if that's like a compliment or an insult.
I think it's an insult.
Probably just an observation.
Yeah, eyes like weak tea, and it's like nothing about the book itself.
So speaking of the archive, you are going to be spending not a little time there next year, Grace? You got big
Yeah, I'll have
plans?
about 6 months there.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, well, it'll be. I mean, I'll have to talk to Matt about how to approach the archive. I had about 5 days there last year before the Wallace conference, and was just kind of like, I don't know, picking what looked interesting or what I thought might be relevant, but it wasn't particularly systematic. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to go back and actually be able to have time to see everything, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things I tell everyone who goes for any length of time is to go into it with an organizational system in mind for your photos.
Oh, yeah.
Because they allow you to take photographs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So most people who are there for, if you're there for a week or 2 weeks, you're just going to go and you're not even going to read very much. You're just going to be photographing, turn a page, photograph, and then put the box down, get a new box, photograph it, and then you can go read it at your leisure when you get home. But being there for 6 months is a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll be living in it, so you will have a whole new approach to the archive. It'd be really interesting to see what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm even on my desktop right now. There's just one folder that's like the archive photos, which I have not even sorted out properly since I went. And yeah, it was exactly that
was a
experience.
year
I was
ago.
just taking a photo of every single page that I came across, and no system at all. So I'll have to go back with a different thing in mind.
And the other the other piece of that is like once you go there every day and sort of what interests you more, it's really hard because even in 6 months you'll find things that interest you more, and you'll want to connect to other archives or pull in because they keep getting more stuff. So
I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I'm going there particularly for the Wallace archive, but like they've got heaps of things that I want to look at and will probably get sidetracked going into.
Yeah, and I mean they have heaps of Wallace stuff too that they keep adding to, and the Little Brown files alone and the Bonnie Nadell collection alone. I mean, once you go through all of those, is a huge project to go through all that correspondence. So I think you have your work cut out for you, but
Yes.
Dave, at the beginning you said that like ISU is like a mecca conference for us. Is like another one is just coming to the archive, and right now, today, tomorrow, there will be someone in that reading room pulling out Wallace files and studying it. So, to me, that's a very bright future for the field.
Yeah.
Do you feel abreast of everything that's in that archive? Like, do you feel...
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, a little bit, yes.
Do you think you've spent the most time in it out of anyone, Matt?
No, I don't know. I mean, there's also people who go to it that, I don't know.
Yeah.
And they have never reached out to me, or I've never reached out to them.
Yeah.
And
or they've never been to a Wallace conference or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, I've looked. You can kind of see who else is in the room there,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen some other people there looking at Wallace stuff, and I'm like, I'm gonna write their name down, see what they publish.
Nice.
But I mean, I'm just lucky that I live here. There are other people who go there probably as much as me or more. Heather Hauser, who teaches at UT, she's probably there a lot.
Yeah, she writes on Wallace and ecology and environment.
Yes. And that's an interesting thing too. I was going to say, like, if you coming here, or any scholar who makes it from the UK or Australia or Europe or anywhere in the world to the US, I see that kind of super interesting, because it's like you're establishing your street cred, right? like you make it here and you can go back and be like, oh, I'm an American scholar too. Have you been? You're like, yes.
Yeah, I always get embarrassed when people ask me, have I been? And I have to my chin lowers a few degrees. And
but going to the conference, I mean, you've been to, it would be a different thing if you've never been to the US.
Sure, yeah.
Like Gerald Murnane, the Australian writer, he's famous for I don't think he's ever left Australia.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Huh.
And he's never been on an airplane. So, I mean, there are very good writers who are provincial.
Right.
But there's also a thing in academia that is super worldly right now, where it's yes, I went to a conference in Paris, I went to a conference in Italy and the US and Australia and Ireland, and you just jet around. That it's still a relatively new thing, I think.
There's an exoticism to it. I know someone who's doing her PhD on Australian literature, so she'd be the person to talk to about that. But she was sort of going, oh, it just sucks because I picked an area where all the conferences are held in this country. I don't get to go overseas and do travel. So I don't know. Must be the perk of academia to be able to go to conferences overseas, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess you'll have that luxury yourself coming up pretty soon with Oz Wallace.
Yes, yeah. That will be a nice 50-minute plane trip to the conference rather than a 32-hour affair. So, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be interesting to see who ends up there as well, because I imagine that there are a lot of American scholars that won't be able to get down for it, but I think it'll bring out a whole new group of people too, which will be cool.
Yeah, I'd imagine. It'd be cool if there were people from New Zealand who got over, and Southern Asia,
and to see just who else in Australia is kind of looking at him. I was going back to Aisling, I was super surprised that when I found her at the conference and that she had an Australian accent, and that we hadn't worked it out yet. So it'll be cool. Yeah,
there's usually a pretty solid contingent of Australians in Illinois for the conference, but not quite as many this year. Without Tony and Lucas and Dan and those guys.
Are you guys at all able to come down to Oz Wallace, or is that not looking on the cards? Yeah,
it's a no-go for me, unfortunately. I would love to. Maybe next year, though, because I'll be living in New Zealand for about 6 months. Yeah, from That's February to August, I'll probably be living in southern New Zealand. So if Oz Wallace happens to be during one of those months, I will hop over for sure.
That would be great.
Yeah.
New Zealand should be good, I would say.
Yeah, I think so.
I've got this Sisyphean 9-to-5 job that it's really tough to get time off from. But
because the travel time is as you know, Grace, you last on our last episode, you were the person who came the furthest for the conference. You won the first book, so that is a soul crushing nightmare of public transit to come from Australia to America.
It's not public, but,
well, ish. No. Yeah.
The flight itself was pretty straightforward, but when I got to Dallas and was catching a flight to Chicago, there were just so many delays, and we actually were on the tarmac, and I had this moment feeling like Elaine in that Seinfeld episode, where she's stuck on the subway, just screaming in my head, and the plane would start moving, and I'd be like, oh, okay, everything's fine, and then it would just stop again, and it was just this absurd, horrible thing. But I think by that stage I was probably just sleep deprived rather than actually any kind of discomfort.
Oh yeah, and peopled out too, because it's rad to be at camp, but at the end of camp you can't wait to just be by yourself for a while. That's
definitely.
Well, thanks for making the journey.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Oh, I enjoy it. I should hope to be back there next year as well, given that I'll actually be in the country, so definitely.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it should be good.
Speaking of like fear of missing out, it occurred to me in downtown Bloomington the day after the conference that I won't be able to make the ISU conference next year because I'll be in New Zealand. So I'm really banking on Oz Wallace being my annual
You're
Wallace
having the
conference.
opposite problem now.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. What were kind of like your main conference highlights or takeaways this year, Grace? Were there any particular talks you went to? You mentioned Matt Luter's talk being awesome, and it was. Anything else that's really kind of like stayed with you in the last few weeks?
There were a lot of really excellent talks, and I thought that there were quite a few good ones in, and this sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, which I'm not because I have nothing to do with their papers, but in the politics panel I found really interesting. Cool. But overall, I think, a lot of the memories came from the conversations in the hallways and kind of hanging out with people around the panels. So that's sort of where my happy memories come from.
Yeah, the social aspects of it. Yeah,
definitely.
I think that's what keeps
obviously,
me going back too.
Matt and Rob's panel was excellent.
Oh yeah, that ruled.
There is no
and the concavity live episode.
Highlight,
yeah, not to blow your own trumpet or anything. Speaking of,
what about you guys? Did you guys have any particular highlights?
I would also cite Matt Luter's paper as being a great, a very well and thoughtfully delivered paper. And he was telling me before he gave it that he was like, he'd never been more nervous to give a paper at this conference than this one, because of the personal nature of it. And so I thought that was really cool to see him, address that publicly. And this is a guy who wrote Understanding Jonathan Lethem. He's like, the Marshall Boswell of the Jonathan Lethem studies. So I thought that was a great talk. Obviously, Matt and Rob's talk was great. What else stood out? John Mango and Samantha Wallace's panel was fantastic. And Jeff Seaver's keynote was, obviously outstanding. Yeah. So
I would give a shout out to Michael O'Connell.
Yeah.
I really liked his paper about
Hemingway. Yeah, it was great.
And I thought that was phenomenal. We could do a whole wrap up of the conference, but okay. I'm not going to.
It's a pity I didn't get to see that paper, so I have to try and read it
really
somewhere,
good.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was on a panel with Julianne McCoben, and she did a paper about Joel Van Dyne. I thought was really good. Mm-hmm. But Michael, I've always admired him as a critic, and he's one of those scholars that his writing is so good and clear and crisp that I look forward to everything that he writes. I thought his paper was fantastic. Mm-hmm. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't see a lot of Hemingway Wallace discussion.
Like none.
Yeah,
none.
So it's like a really refreshing talk for sure.
No, super great. Yeah. Grace, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off tonight?
No, I guess not. I mean, I can't even. My brain's clearly not working at the moment. I don't think I've had coffee yet today.
We can cut that. No,
yeah,
what time is it there? Where you at?
It's in the morning.
It's 1:00, but
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You just woke up. No.
Yeah. I mean, have you guys got any final things that you would like me to comment on, or things that you want to say about stuff? I don't know.
I mean, the one thing I forgot to mention in your intros, I would say that Grace is also on the editorial board of our new Journal of David Foster Wallace Studies. And so I think you're going to have an interesting viewpoint into where the field is going. So, we might check in with you from time to time and see like what your perspective is on things, how what's getting submitted and things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's really interesting reading all the abstracts and seeing what the new directions that things are headed in.
Yeah,
for
cool.
sure.
Are there any particular subject areas that you're especially psyched about in terms of where scholarship is going lately?
I think because I have such limited background in it, I am really interested in the diversity stuff and seeing where gender and race sit in his works. Yeah. But also, and this is a focus of Oz Wallace, kind of comparing him alongside other authors. And, you just mentioned that Hemingway, that was a refreshing paper. So I'm curious to see where people take that and where they read his influences into him as well.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Well, we very much look forward to your novel, Grace, in the future, and seeing some familiar faces.
Novella length.
Novella.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Exactly,
Yeah,
the
totally.
novella length
Yeah.
novel. Thank you. Yes, it'll be interesting. I think the Wallace community will be the community that will most matter to me in terms of how they respond to it. So it will be very interesting to get some feedback on it eventually.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to get that out there. Help you get it out there once it lands. Yeah.
Great.
Do the tweets and stuff. Grace, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome to hang out with you a couple weeks ago in Illinois, and now to catch up with you again and talk about your scholarship and all the cool things that are on the horizon for your work. So we very much appreciate you coming all this way from Southern Australia to the Concavity.
And
thank you guys. You've made me feel very welcome, and like it's not a stretch to say that being on your show is a little bit of a dream come true. So yeah, it's very exciting for me to be here.
Well, that's a nightmare for me to be on this show. So I'm sweating the whole time, every time. I'm just kidding.
And if people want to follow you, are you on Twitter, Academia? Where are you at?
Yeah, I've got an academia.edu page which hasn't been updated in a while, and I also have a Twitter account that I don't tweet from very often, but people can go to both if they would like.
Cool.
I think the Twitter handle is _GH_Chipperfield with a capital C, so that's probably my most public account that people can access.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Matt, where can the people find the Great Concavity in all the onlines?
We're at Concavity Show at Twitter and Instagram.
Yep.
Concavity Show, and you can email us concavityshow@gmail.com. We love getting the email.
We do.
Feel free to email us any questions. It's been a while since we've had some I would say show-worthy discussion that we would bring on there. We get a lot of good emails, but if you have like specific questions you want us to address on the show, feel free to email us.
Or ideas for episodes or guests that you would like to see on.
Yeah, or if you have any other suggestions of where we should move the conversation. We've tried some on Facebook, and we might keep trying that. It doesn't seem to be as great for conversations as Twitter, where there's a lot of people that are already kind of built-in community there. But if you have other ideas, let us know too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever feel like it and you want to leave a review on iTunes, I've heard, and I've not done a lot of research on this, but I've heard that the more reviews there are on a podcast, the more publicly visible it is in terms of like algorithms recommending it to people and stuff. So, if you want more people to hear this, then you could leave a review and we'd really appreciate it. 4 out of 5 stars would be great.
That was Dave's whole paper revolved around that, by the way.
Yeah. That turned into a very fun continuing joke throughout the weekend.
It was a mini meme of 4 or 5 stars there.
Yeah. Awesome. We want to thank, as usual, Robin O'Neill for her supplying of the art for our podcast, and we want to thank the band Parquet Courts for letting us use their music. And Matt, is there anyone else specifically that you'd like to thank, maybe from the conference?
Well, I want to say, first of all, get well soon to Robin O'Neill.
Yes.
And we're a big
She's
fan
on the
of her
mend.
podcast,
That's good.
me reading stuff, but I just want to give her as much well wishes as possible.
Absolutely.
And everyone who attended the Wallace conference, especially the people, I feel bad that I didn't get to talk to everyone, but I got to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I don't want to exclude anyone, but I do want to give a special shout out to Ryan Edel, who was the conference organizer and is super important to keeping that thing alive and working. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. And very cool to meet a few listeners who just came because they listened to the podcast and they love Wallace. They just wanted to hang out and get more of that in their life. So super rad shout out to you guys as well. You know who you are.
Yeah, a lot of good people that we got to meet in the flesh there. That was great.
Yeah, I think we mentioned most of them by name last episode. Yep. So, yeah, cool. All right, Grace, thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Mamacita.